My lords, today I deliver a chronological report of our galaxy's history, focusing on the 7 mighty precursor races that have existed over the past several million years. Starting with the Zroni, we have no exact date for when the Zroni existed. However, given what we do know, it is likely that they're the oldest by far, possibly well over 100 million years old. As we know it, the Zroni were the most powerful psionics ever to have graced our galaxy. They would humble even the mighty Holy Guardians who exist today. All we know of the Zroni is catalogued from psionic crystals, which they use to contain their memories and emotions. It is a technology far beyond what we have managed to accomplish. The first of these crystals was found in the centre of a perfectly untouched city. Normally with dead planets you'd find signs of death and destruction, but not so here. It was as if the inhabitants simply vanished overnight. Other than the city itself and a light blue dust, there was no sign that life ever existed in this place. However, it is here that we first learned of the Zroni existence and their immense psychic abilities. If our interpretations are correct, the Zroni soon made contact with the beings who occupy the Shroud. It is unclear if a bargain was made, but from this point it seems their power exploded. The Zroni learned to psionically enter the Shroud and acquired the ability to manipulate its essence to their whim. They created a utopia unlike anything that had ever been seen before. Imagine for a moment a place where any thought could become reality in a heartbeat, all answerable to you. That, I imagine, is a drug that is very hard to give up. Furthermore, they learned that the Shroud touches all physical space simultaneously. They had the ability to enter at one physical point and psionically jump to any other part of the known galaxy. Quite the feat. It is perhaps because of this power we found little evidence of expansion. The Shroud, it seems, enveloped their entire culture, science, entertainment, and all walks of life were pushed aside in order to fuel their need to enter the Shroud. As I mentioned earlier, the Zroni were aware that other entities lived within the Shroud. Sadly, little information on the speculation exists, beyond the assumption that many arrogantly dismissed these entities as any real threat. Some of the Zroni speculated these entities were having a subtle impact on their culture. The group believed that these entities were power beyond measure and were trying to subvert the Zroni to their will. Sadly, it seems this was not further explored. We don't know exactly when, but at some point the Zroni learned that their new powers came at a cost. They learned that the supermassive black hole at the centre of the galaxy, the same one that we see today, was growing, and it became clear to them that this was fueling their ability to manipulate the Shroud. With every change the Zroni made, this black hole grew larger and larger, consuming the mass of the physical galaxy and siphoning the energy back into the Shroud. This discovery would shape the way that the Zroni civilization would come to an end. Debate engulfed the Zroni, and two sides formed, the Divine and the Saviours. Argument led to division, and division turned into a fully fledged civil war. The Divine felt that the fate of the physical galaxy was no concern of theirs. Of course, they would continue to live as gods within the Shroud, irrespective of what happened to the rest of the galaxy. The Saviours were aghast at this. They had no wish to live as parasites, preying on other races. Siphoning energy from the physical world to fuel their base desires was abhorrent to this group. And besides, even without their ability to enter and manipulate the Shroud, their psionics still guaranteed them a near utopian existence in the physical galaxy. Beyond this point, most of the records focus on the war. The majority of the Zroni population sided with the Saviours, and while this gave the Saviours an advantage, the Divine were now unshackled, and able to use the full might of the Shroud, whereas the Saviours were limited to the power that they could draw from within their own bodies. In any other war, this would have been more than enough, but the power of the Shroud was immense, and it seems at this point the Divine was sure to win the war. That is until a discovery was made by a Saviour scientist. The crystals do not give him a name, but merely call him the Hero. He theorized he could turn his power upon itself and consume himself in a chain reaction. The Hero put his theory into action, consuming himself, and all that remained was a dusty residue. That residue is what we now know to be called Zoro. This dust was essentially the sum of his total psionic potential, and could be used by another scion to extend their abilities far beyond what they could accomplish alone. This great sacrifice turned the tide of the war. The Divine began to lose, and became increasingly desperate. In their desperation, they spawned ever more increasing horrors, shaping the Shroud into beings beyond all measure of rage and madness. The war, it seems, was not over yet, and would not end with victory for either side. The Divine had fallen beyond all measure of reason, and according to the records, a pact was made with one of the entities occupying the Shroud. A pact they named the End of the Cycle. The Divine strategy would be to expend untold energy in order to grow the supermassive black hole at the centre of the galaxy exponentially, effectively wiping out the galaxy and the Saviours with it. Fortunately for us, this did not happen. The Saviours made their way to their capital world of Zroni, a world that still exists today, however cleaved in two by psionic energy. It is here that the Saviours made the ultimate sacrifice to stop the Divine madness. Every Saviour except one consumed themselves in a giant psionic sacrifice, channeling the power of their entire species into one lone Zroni. This lone Zroni used this immense power to end the existence of the Divine and killing himself in the process. In the snap of a finger, the Zroni were totally annihilated and turned to dust, thus ending the threat of the Divine for good. Although there are rumours that a being occupies one of the Zroni crystals held in the Curator archive, but this is just a rumour. A relic of that nature would be unspeakably dangerous. And this is where the story ends, at least until another foolish empire decides to make a pact with the entities of the Shroud. Of all the ancient precursor races I've had the pleasure of researching, the Vultaum are the oddest of them all. It must be stated at this point the Vultaum are strange, beyond the strange one would expect for a 12 million year old ancient society. Their priorities and thought processes do not appear to be that of a hyper-advanced dominant empire, although clearly they were exactly that. The Vultaum, also known as the Vultaum Star Assembly, were a race of worm-like annelids, approximately 3 to 4 meters in length, who communicated primarily through vibrations carried along their segmented bodies. They were long-lived, living circa 270 Earth years, and occupied our galaxy approximately 12 million years ago. The Vultaum seem to have ignored the normally conventionally popular field of artificial intelligence, instead focusing exclusively on virtual realities and massive computer simulations. For lack of a better word, video games. Quite how these simulations were maintained and operated without the appropriate computing power of an AI is beyond our current understanding. In any case, a substantial amount of information regarding their culture comes from ancient copies of these video games, one in particular. Seemingly, it was a multi-user virtual reality game enjoyed by billions of their population across their empire. Other than what we know from the Vultaum video games, we've learnt from beacons designed to relay quite an unusual message. It seems the Vultaum at some point in their development became obsessed with what they call the true existence, and instructions that sentient beings must disconnect. It is unclear precisely what they are referring to at this point. Evidence suggests not all in the Vultaum followed this unknown philosophy. We do have dig sites showing a splinter group who firmly did not believe the dominant doctrine. They seem to have existed beyond the wider collapse of the Vultaum society. As we dug more into the Vultaum culture, it seems almost at every turn their settlements followed a similar path. They were destroyed, but not via war or disease. It seemed self-destruction was the culprit. Ranging from orbital stations, mining facilities, and outer colonies, they were all destroyed, often by antimatter bombs deliberately detonated by the Vultaum themselves. It was not until we finally identified and explored their homeworld we understood the true extent of the Vultaum's descent into madness. Their homeworld, while ravaged by a number of massive antimatter explosions, gave us the information required to finish this story. Approximately a century before their extinction, the Vultaum experienced a radical shift in ideology. The why is unclear, but this new philosophy posited that the entire universe they occupied, the one that we now live in, was an artificial reality in which all sapient beings had been unwittingly plugged into for the amusement of some higher power. The Vultaum undertook increasingly radical attempts to forcefully disconnect from the simulation, most of which involved mass suicide. The Vultaum finally concluded that only the simultaneous disconnection of billions of individuals would destabilize the system enough to grant them freedom. At an agreed upon hour, Vultaum across the galaxy killed themselves by any means available, often in the form of gigantic antimatter bombs. Those Vultaum who saw through this madness and refused to take part in the mass suicide were too few to repopulate the species, and so sadly, the Vultaum faded into obscurity and eventual extinction. As bizarre as it might sound, one of our lead scientists, who it must be noted is slightly maniacal, believed the Vultaum may have been onto something. There are rumours of a device, a relic of sorts, that has been left behind after all these years. This relic is named a Vultaum reality perforator, and according to the rumours, the device literally allows you to rewrite reality as we know it for a very short time. Now, if reality is indeed reality, then what or how does the device work? In which case, did the Vultaum make a mistake? Or did they discover a terrible secret? Fortunately or not, the secret of the Vultaum will be buried beyond this memo. Should this situation leak to the wider public, it is expected that there would be massive negative reaction, and at a time when our empire does not need the drop in morale, the secret will die with the Vultaum. The Baol were discovered quite by accident. A research team was documenting an ancient race known as the Grana. The Grana existed approximately 7 million years ago, and appeared to be a militaristic empire focused on expansion through conflict. It is from data crystals discovered at a Grana dig site that we first learn of the Baol and their conflict with the Grana. According to the Grana data and our own archaeological discoveries, the Baol were a plantoid hive mind at least 10 million years old. They appear to have originated from a single planet and evolved from plant life native to that world. It seems the prehistoric Baol were all clones and gradually developed the capacity for hive consciousness over millions of years in a slow, peaceful growth on their home world. Although clearly very alien to our own biology, the Baol were sentient and very capable. We know they developed the ability to traverse the stars and settle on other worlds. They did this through a remarkable integration of organic technology, building organic structures with materials that would rival the best our own engineers could produce today. We also know that they were very long-lived, surviving for hundreds of Earth years. We also know they occupied multiple worlds and had an empathic ability to communicate across vast distances. It's unclear precisely how the messages were sent between the individual Baol units, but there does not appear to be any distance that prevented communication. Furthermore, there is evidence of Baol biotechnology in the form of biocomputers dating back at least 10 million years. These biocomputers appear to be used as a teaching device for immature members of the Baol species, i.e. those not yet ready for full integration into the hive. The biocomputer contains data for techniques for growth, horticulture, and nutrition. This suggests that the Baol prized terraforming techniques above all else, which makes sense as we would assume that they would have been highly dependent on their environment for their own survival. Sadly for the Baol, the Grana did not appreciate the majesty of their race. Although in many ways the Baol were advanced, it seems they did not have much in the way of defending themselves from a technologically advanced spacefaring civilization. Multiple examples of Grana cruelty and aggression have been identified. Upon first encountering the Baol, the Grana designated them worthy of their attention. The Baol's plentiful resources are referenced, but given the Grana methods of war, it seems acquiring the resource was not the primary objective. The first encounter between the two races was a morbid affair. The world we identified as Haribas 2A is a dry, barren world totally devoid of all atmosphere and life. It also has a near endless trove of fossilized remains. Many of these, as it turns out, are the Baol. It seems the Granair did not want the resources of Haribas 2, as instead of invading, they firebombed the entire planet from orbit, causing a planet-wide inferno destined to decimate the world. Widespread deforestation caused a catastrophic disruption in the planet's ecosystem, and a lack of oxygen-fixing vegetation caused the planet's atmosphere to deplete over the next 60,000 years, resulting in a dry, dead world. The second documented encounter was no less violent than the first. Upon arrival at the coordinates in the Grunur records, we did not find a planet, rather the remains of one. It seems the Grunur did not wish to wait for firebombs this time, and opted instead to crack the planet entirely. The Grunur speak very poorly of the Baol organism, describing it as feeble and slow to react. It seems any defense the Baol had was easily swept aside. The third discovery concerning this conflict was an intact planet. This surprised our scientists considering the destruction at the previous two sites. It seems the Grunur had grown tired of extermination and instead switched to slavery. It is unclear how long this world was occupied by the Grunur, but fossil records suggest they lived side by side with the Baol for many centuries. Interestingly, the Baol fossil records begins to shift after a few hundred years of occupation. The Baol neurological structure underwent a dramatic change, and if our interpretation is correct, the Baol began to lose the ability to communicate and connect as a hive mind. It is unclear if this made them unable to function as slaves, or if these units were developing individuality. Considering the circumstance, perhaps the former is correct, but sadly, we will never know. It was on this same planet a distress signal was identified for what seemed to be a Grunur research facility, and it was here that the greatest and yet most chilling discovery was made. Deep in the dilapidated ruins of the time-worn Grunur research facility, among the long defunct computer panels and deteriorated research equipment, a specimen was found. Pin-cushioned by nutrient tubes and critically failing life support systems lay one single organism, what we believe to be the last of the Baol. Miraculously, it was still alive, surrounded by the sludgy remains of other specimens in a row of cracked and leaking vats. More wondrous than the discovery itself, the specimen had the ability to communicate and began to engage with us. It seemed to undertake a great effort to communicate with us, taking minutes to form sentences. The last of the Baol spoke with great sadness. It spoke poetically of what it referred to as the burners, describing the destruction they caused, and speaking with great regret regarding its inability to react quickly enough as their planets were burnt to ash. It was a moving tale and provoked soul-searching of how we treat other races deemed to be less than ourselves. Unfortunately, millennia of living alone in a vat surrounded by the death and decay of its kin had left this Baol wanting peace. It is frankly remarkable that a being could withstand such an abhorrent existence and remain sentient to the end. The machine keeping the Baol alive was switched off per its wishes, and the last of a long-forgotten race passed on. However, this is not the end of the story. Within this research facility, the Grunur had been working on a technology to clone the Baol, we believe in order to use them as livestock, and perhaps to exploit their wondrous terraforming abilities. Our lead scientists have taken this research and hope to finish what the Grunur started, thus reviving the Baol from extinction. I can only hope that they are properly integrated into our empire and treated with the reverence and dignity that they deserve. The Yuht occupied our galaxy approximately 6 million years ago, and appear to be by far the largest of the 7 precursor races that we have identified. The Yuht were very long in length, but quite flat. They were arthropod analogues, and they were equipped with a substantial exoskeleton. Essentially, they were giant centipedes. It seems an individual adult could reach a length of nearly 100 meters. Their starships were of a similar pattern to our own, i.e. they had destroyers, corvettes, cruisers, battleships, and according to ship logs, it was exceedingly rare for a Yuht crew to be any more than 2 or 3, presumably due to space constraints. We have found evidence of worlds terraformed by the Yuht, seemingly specifically for breeding purposes. Initially, our scientists identified a Yuht colony that had been the subject of a horrendous orbital bombardment. However, upon further study, we identified logs that detailed the history of this planet. This planet served as a hatchery world, designated as such by their so-called Ministry of Breeding. According to the logs, this was standard doctrine for the Yuht. Worlds were sterilized of all potential predators and harmful elements before Yuht eggs were planted on the surface. The Yuht then seemingly left their young to it, letting them hatch and grow for several centuries, before returning to collect them and integrate them into their own society. If they're young or anything like our own, then sending them away to mature for a couple of hundred years would certainly be more peaceful. Furthermore, we believe the Yuht to have been extremely long-lived, an average lifespan being approximately 1,000 Earth cycles. As birth rate was low, each death was treated significantly, with much emphasis placed on burial ceremonies. We also think that the Yuht believed in an afterlife of sorts. Our science teams have found burial sites looted, suggesting valuables were buried with the deceased, and indeed we have found non-valuables left behind by looters. Our archaeologists found a large doll resembling an adult Yuht. We speculate that it may have served as a good luck charm or memento of sorts to carry into the afterlife. Other aspects of the Yuht are interesting, and seemingly quite different to our own. They established vast listening arrays across their empire, sentries set up to scan for any sign of intelligent alien life. Oddly, they didn't identify any. The Yuht, it seems, spent literally 1 million years alone in this vast universe. Now this raises some important questions. We know that intelligent alien life existed before the Yuht, i.e. the Vultaum, and we know that the Vultaum interacted with other intelligent life. Our own galaxy is currently teeming with intelligent life, all of whom, at various technological states, indicating vastly different points of sentience across the timeline. In any case, why the Yuht were alone for so long is very odd and quite disturbing. The question of what happened to the rest of the galaxy will need to be addressed, and I intend to commission a research project to look into this. The Yuht did find references relating to older empires than themselves, but perhaps as they were alone, debunked all these artifacts as fraudulent. Wrongly, it must be stated. We have identified some of these artifacts and linked them to previous Precursor civilization. It is unclear whether the Yuht leaders did not want their citizens to be aware that at least at some point there was other alien life, even if their own galaxy was now devoid, or if the Yuht was simply ignorant. It may be that the Yuht hierarchy learnt why they were alone, and either through some form of protection or manipulation chose to suppress the information. Unlike the vast amount of sentient life we've researched, the Yuht seemed quite content to live in isolation. We've identified a Yuht dwelling within an asteroid cluster that appears to have been the home of a Yuht celebrity, a famous philosopher hermit called Yaklir. According to data slates found within her dwelling, she was apparently a figure of some renown in their culture, although it isn't entirely clear in what capacity. Sadly, it seems she perished alone while waiting for a scheduled supply shuttle that never arrived. The downfall of the once mighty Yuht Empire began approximately 1 million years since their first foray into space. Another empire had been discovered. The Yuht named them the Jabba Adini, and reacted with both awe and horror upon the discovery of sentient alien life. From these interactions is where we discovered the majority of what we know about the Yuht Navy and their combat capabilities. In orbit around the Jabba Adini homeworld, we found the remains of a Yuht cruiser. Even a ship of this size, it appears, was only crewed by 3. Fascinatingly, the ship contained no faster-than-light drive. It appears that the Yuht never breached the light barrier. The ship, however, was equipped with multiple cryobays, suggesting that instead of depending upon speed, the Yuht were content with their cryotechnology and their incredible natural lifespan to explore and populate the stars. As they had never fought an interstellar war before, apparently the notion of fast response was lost on them. I doubt an enemy would wait for you and your crew to thaw before blowing your ships apart. In any case, the meeting of alien life was to be the downfall of the Yuht Empire. They had spent over 1 million years searching for sentient alien life, and when they found it, they didn't like it. The Jabba Adini was a young race that had only recently achieved interstellar travel, but they had a vastly different approach to technological advancement than the Yuht. The Yuht viewed this as a tremendous threat, and it came at quite a shock. The Yuht leadership reached a consensus. The Jabba Adini had to be eradicated before they grew too powerful. A massive surprise attack was launched by the Yuht with the aim of annihilating the Jabba Adini homeworld. The largest fleet in the million-year Yuht history was assembled and set course to lay waste to this new empire. Sadly for the Yuht, the Jabberodini had already acquired faster than light travel and were experimenting with technologies that the Yuht had never considered. The initial Yuht surprise attack was met with fierce resistance and eventually beaten back at a great cost to both sides. This was to be the nail in the coffin for the Yuht. Despite their 1 million year technological head start, they seem to have very little tactical nous, and the Jabberodini, having recently fought unification wars within their own civilization, were much better suited to a prolonged war. Within a decade of warfare, the million-year-old Yuht Empire was utterly destroyed. Fortunately, the Yuht did not just leave us with the tale of hubris. We have been able to modify their cryotech and retrofit it into our own ships, giving our colony ships extra capacity and decreasing the upkeep of the crew during extra long voyages. We hope this may be useful with our expedition of the L cluster due to start, but time will tell. Data indicates a confederation of sorts named the First League occupied a significant proportion of our galaxy approximately 2 million years ago. They appear to have been a federation, perhaps the first, consisting of many different alien races coexisting in relative peace, or at least that's how it started. This federation maintained a massive fleet, aptly named the Grand Navy. This fleet was used to safeguard member nations from external aggressors and to combat space piracy. Multiple Navy bases have been found across First League territory. Inter-system peacekeeping was clearly a priority. There is plenty of evidence suggesting the Grand Navy had an awful lot of anti-piracy to keep up with. Multiple asteroid bases have been found, revealing a significant criminal enterprise was thriving within First League space. Smuggling and piracy was clearly an issue across Federation member borders. Evidence of the Grand Fleet is fairly abundant, considering how much time has passed since its operation. Our science team has excavated several starship hulls, ancient relics from massive space battles. The forces involved are from the 2nd and 3rd fleets of the First League Grand Navy, fighting to contain an incursion by the combined fleets of a race called the Rikium. We only know little about the Rikium. They were a nomadic warrior species from the galactic rim. What seemingly began as a skirmish has escalated into a running fleet battle involving hundreds of ships on both sides. It is unclear which side left victorious. We have evidence that shows the First League treated primitive species with some reverence. We have found hidden observation posts appearing to have been the focus of a study on Bronze Age primitives. It would appear that the First League studied these primitives from private, thus not to contaminate their culture. At least 7 other worlds were found with these observation posts, all hidden from the pre-space civilizations. Sadly for this particular civilization, their world appears to have been ravaged by slavers following the First League's collapse and subsequent power vacuum. The observation posts have mostly been destroyed by advanced antimatter bombs. We do have information on the races that made up the First League. A Space Hulk, later identified as a First League cruiser, contained relatively intact crew data. It appears that the navy of the First League was crewed by at least 12 different races of alien. Of the races, this is what we know. First, we have the Kamdi. These were an insectoid hive mind, building huge hive cities covering the surface of their world. It appears that they were a warrior culture and fought several wars against the established First League upon first contact. However, upon meeting defeat, the Kamdi were offered a seat within the First League, and they would go on to dominate the League's military, serving as shock troops against the League's enemies and establishing an honor guard to protect First League politicians. Next, we have the Shiseigo, a subterranean empire and one of the founders of the First League. They were reptilian with elongated and legless bodies that could be longer than 20 meters in length. All surviving accounts indicate that they were expert traders. Their trade barges were often the first point of contact between non-affiliated races and the First League members. It is doubtful whether the League could have expanded as rapidly as it did without the benefit of the extensive Shiseigo trade network. We also have the Maigar Yang. They were an unusually small race, most individuals being no taller than 0.6 meters or 2 feet in height. They were mammalian rodents and seemingly herbivores. The Maigar population was clustered into several hundred massive arcologies, spread out across the surface of each planet. Each arcology was capable of supporting several 100 million individuals, and they were connected by multiple skyways. The Mygar were clearly conservationalists and made great effort to protect their environment. Furthermore, they were expert diplomats and incredibly egalitarian by our standards. One's station and ability to rise was based purely upon their social skills. The Mygar diplomatic corps are widely to have been believed the driving force behind the creation of the First League. And finally, the fourth race we have significant data on is the Vorpak. These were large, flightless birds, but it seems they walked on long, spindly legs, with females reaching upwards of 4 meters tall. All of their cities were built in hollowed-out miasas. Scans indicate that when they ran out of natural candidates, they began to build them artificially. The Vorpak were the think tanks of the First League, renowned as the best scientists in the galaxy. Their research innovations drove the League's initial expansion phase, and more than one species was brought into the fold by the promises of access to this technology. It is unclear precisely how long this federation between races lasted. Evidence suggests dissatisfaction was quite evident early on. Our science team have identified a ruined colony meant to serve as a propaganda tool, i.e. a model world where all League Empire races could live together in harmony. This appears to have backfired. There is evidence of significant infighting between the colonists, and a large burial site has been found indicating a massacre occurred at some point. It is not clear precisely what caused the downfall of this empire. Clearly, the agreements between its Federation members were not as harmonized as required to maintain the peace between this many races of aliens. It is likely the disharmony caused by the different races operating and specializing in different sects contributed greatly. For a decision to promote science over trade would surely greatly benefit the Vorpak at the behest of the Shiseigo, and as such, animosity leads to distrust, which leads to disillusion in the greater good of the Federation. The sad story of the First League capital, Fenhabis III, provides a stark viewpoint should one wish to undertake a diplomatic enterprise of this size. Fenhabis III was one of the largest city worlds ever to have been constructed, a true ecumenopolis of magnificent proportions. However, like all great empires, they have the age-old problem of logistics. This city world required billions and billions of tons of food and other resources to be shipped in daily in order to support its endless consumption. When the League collapsed, these shipments stopped overnight. Those who had the means managed to escape to other worlds, but for most of the population, mass starvation and anarchy followed, as criminal warlords stepped in to take control. Within a few centuries, the entire planet dwindled and died, much like the First League, and in retrospect, its potentially naive mission. The Irassians occupied our galaxy a little over 1 million years ago. They were a militaristic interstellar power that held sway over a vast quantity of territory and seemed to have vassalized many other empires, almost certainly through military campaigns and war. Very little evidence of Irassian diplomatic corps have been identified. The Irassians were 6-limbed mammalians and seemingly particularly susceptible to disease, which in itself seems slightly odd. Most of our data suggests that by the time empires can travel faster than light, they've conquered the majority of healthcare issues that they may face. The Irassians, however, had clearly not conquered disease. Roughly half of the total wealth of their empire generated per cycle was funneled into healthcare and disease prevention. Despite this, they remained a sickly race. At almost every dig site there is evidence of the Irassians succumbing to a fairly standard bacterial infection, which is universally referred to between themselves and their subject races as the Javorian pox. This pox did not affect any race bar the Irassians. However, a recording of one of their subject races suggests that any species could be a carrier, irrespective of their own susceptibility to the bacterium. Other than healthcare, a large proportion of the Irassian resources went into warfare. As stated, we know that they had vassalized several subject empires, and they were clearly not friendly integrations. We have found evidence of a race called the Jorga, a molluscoid species that were fairly primitive, i.e. they had not yet achieved spaceflight, but they were close. The Irassians, after a lengthy military campaign, conquered them, leaving a substantial military presence behind, which suggests the Jorga were not content under the Irassian yoke. Interestingly, the Jorga were seemingly aware of the Javorian pox. They had managed to transmit a message to other Irassian client species, which reads as follows:
"The time to strike at the tyrants is now. Our agents have learned that the Javorian pox only affects the weak Irassians, but any species can act as a carrier for the disease. Every effort must be made to infiltrate their worlds, their space stations and their ships. At long last the Irassians have met a foe that cannot be brought low by their vaunted starfleet. By the gods, this opportunity must not be squandered."
The number of species who received this message is unclear, but we do know that an empire called the Tai Derg, a race of winged arthropods, either attempted an uprising of sorts or were implicated in a plot to spread the pox. The Irassians showed little patience and subsequently annihilated their entire planet from orbit, leaving nothing but a tomb of fossilized remains. Orbital bombardment was apparently a speciality of the Irassians. There is plenty of evidence that this was their standard doctrine for dealing with potential uprisings and threat of spread of the pox, even within their own people. We have found many examples of Irassian colonies near the edge of their territories utterly annihilated from orbit. At first we thought this was from war with a rival empire. However, not so. We have uncovered a recording of an exchange between an admiral of their navy and the Irassian fleet command situated in their home system. The exchange orders the admiral to purge a colony of all life, to which the admiral seemingly pushes back on. Sadly, the rest of the recording is destroyed, but considering the state of the planet, it seems that the Irassian fleet command ensured that the orders were followed through. Further evidence of the pox spreading across Irassian worlds is evident. We've identified a mining colony that was active approximately 1.2 billion years ago. Fossilized remains of over 100 miners have been found at the bottom of one of the boreholes. We assume that they did not jump and their bodies were dropped down in a fruitless attempt to stop the spread of infection. But perhaps they were forced to jump down before death. This would be in keeping with the Irassian purging of their own planets. A dark thought, and one that highlights just how virulent this bacterial infection was to the Irassians. Eventually, we identified and visited the patient zero of planets for this pox. Interestingly, the bacteria we believe that caused the pox still thrives on the planet today. However, by our healthcare standards, it is fairly harmless. The working theory is that the bacterium invaded the Irassian colony's quarantine rituals and then likely spread to a merchant ship via the air filtration system, and from there went on to infect their entire population. Given the rate of the spread detailed by the Irassians, and that there is no mention of this world with any real significance, it is likely that they never identified it as the originator for their empire-ending Javorian pox. Today we discovered the Irassian homeworld, and with it their so-called authority of disease control, situated upon an orbital station. The station had been looted, but was still in surprisingly good condition. However, not unsurprisingly, it seems that their entire race ended up succumbing to this pox. The final log in the station's computer detailed that the pox had spread uncontrollably across their empire and they were becoming increasingly desperate. They attached all their failed attempts to produce a cure in the vain hope that the data would be useful to any surviving Irassians who remained unaffected. Their homeworld, known as Irassia, had been oddly systematically bombed from orbit, but this did not occur around the time of the Irassians. This bombardment was extremely precise, ensuring that every square meter of the planet had been glassed, and it occurred only approximately 2,000 years prior to our arrival. Perhaps this is the work of the Holy Guardians. In any case, the surface is still coated in the fossilized remains of literally billions of Irassians, all of whom succumbed to the pox in the final year of their empire. Interestingly, the widespread panic that accompanied the first outbreaks of the pox seemed to be largely absent, and most Irassians had come to accept their fate as the end drew near. Already there is talk within our military hierarchy that we should weaponize the pox. The more xenophobic of them, citing such nonsense as, we could conquer worlds without firing a shot and leave no damage to infrastructure. They are fools. If anything, this dead world should serve as a stark reminder for our empire not to become complacent and over-reliant on our wondrous technology. It should be an example to all that hubris is the death of us all, and who's to say that we will not tumble out of existence as this once mighty Irassian empire. And finally, we shall finish with perhaps the most known and certainly most recent precursor race, the Cybrex. The Cybrex was spawned into existence approximately 600,000 years ago. They were a machine empire linked together in a mechanical collective consciousness. At some point in their development, the Cybrex underwent a galaxy-wide rampage with the sole goal of wiping out all sentient organic life in the galaxy. The reasons are currently unknown. We do know that the Cybrex originated from the Kerr homeworld. The Kerr, another ancient race, it seems were the original creators of the Cybrex, but sadly paid the ultimate price. The details surrounding the birth of the Cybrex are quite unclear, but at some point the Cybrex turned on their creators, butchering them and effectively destroying the Kerr homeworld. The systematic destruction of the Kerr neighbouring systems continued until their civilization ceased to exist. And bizarrely, some effort was taken to eradicate all memory of the Kerr, to the point that we do not even know the name of the star system of their homeworld. The Kerr, unfortunately, were the first of many empires to fall to the genocidal rampage of the Cybrex. Once their creators were eliminated, the Cybrex continued with their destructive objectives. They came across the Indimac. Records show the Indimac to be a peaceful people with little means of defending themselves against the machine horde. It is understood that the Indimac were bombed into submission before the Cybrex dropped warforms onto the planet and initiated a cleansing, resulting in the destruction of 97% of the Indimac population in as little as 3 years. The plight of the Indimac was not finished. The remaining survivors were enslaved, forced to assist in the destruction of more organic life. They were installed in factories producing more Cybrex warforms and sent to mines to produce the minerals for alloys required for this undertaking. We have more evidence of the Cybrex onslaught. Evidence suggests their next target was a subterranean empire known as the Grungi. Against the Grungi, their standard orbital bombardment patterns were ineffective, and a colossal ground assault occurred. The Grungi clearly offered stiff resistance. Cybrex warform debris is scattered throughout the homeworld's immense cave system. Data shows that this offensive stalemated. The Cybrex were unable to push into the central core of these subterranean tunnels and retreated back into space to assess their options. The Cybrex, in a manner that can only be described as horrific, took to this problem in an unorthodox manner. They captured 2 large asteroids and hurled them towards the Grungi homeworld. The impact caused catastrophic damage and resulted in the collapse of over 70% of the tunnel network. This savage but effective tactic provided the advantage the Cybrex needed and resulted in the Grungi's ultimate destruction. Following the destruction of the Grungi, an alliance of sorts formed. The exact nature of the alliance has been lost to time, but there is evidence of a colossal space battle above a Cybrex world. Ship components from at least 5 different sources have been identified, suggesting an alliance of 4 alien races hoping to put an end to Cybrex genocide. Judging by the relatively small amount of Cybrex debris, it seems that the alliance did not bear much fruit. The individual races who formed this band is unclear, but it seems prudent to suggest they were completely destroyed at the hands of a subsequent Cybrex counterattack. At some point in the Cybrex development, something began to shift. There is evidence that they did not only seek to exterminate organic life, but also learn from it. On many of their planets further out from the core of their empire, sections were found to have been created in order to stimulate organic life. It remains unclear why the Cybrex made the effort to create these reservations. Perhaps an attempt to learn organic weakness, or maybe even simple curiosity. Furthermore, there is evidence of the Cybrex cataloguing its organic victims. Cybrex ships have been found with organic cryobays full of tubes containing different species. From the barcodes tattooed onto the organic skin, it is clear that these specimens were kept around for experimentation. The purpose, as we understand, was an experimentation in synthetic life. In one facility, organics were found with limbs and organs replaced by cybernetics. The purpose of the transformation is unclear, and no other evidence of the Cybrex experiments have been found to date. Around the time of the shift from exterminator to servitor, it seems not all in the consciousness agreed with their direction. 2 factions emerged, the exterminator and the preserver. It is believed that they turned upon one another. 2 warforms were found damaged and destroyed beyond repair. It seems clear from the residual weapon signatures that this was blue on blue, or friendly fire. It is unclear if this was an accident or deliberate, however the thought of the Cybrex making mistakes is a hotly debated topic. Perhaps a wave of discontent within the collective was occurring. In the 17th year since the Cybrex had emerged, it would seem a total re-evaluation of their programming occurred. The why is unclear. It may be that battlefield attrition played a role. However, given the evidence of Cybrex superiority, that seems quite unlikely. The more likely is a shift in their fundamental ideology. Whatever the reason, they began to withdraw from known space over the next century, retreating to a system where they had built a wonderful megastructure we have come to know as a ring world. This ring world, the first of its kind, housed and sustained their entire civilization. The Cybrex stayed here dormant for millennia, until a lone exploration vessel came upon the system. Histories had well documented the Cybrex genocides, and their wave of untold destruction. It was recognized by the organics occupying the surrounding space that the Cybrex was a real threat, and one that should be dealt with. As such, an alliance was again formed between several neighbouring powers, organising the largest military fleet that had ever been assembled. This fleet advanced on the Cybrex home system with the firepower of 1,000,000 suns, and proceeded to bombard the ringworld into the abyss. Accounts of the day differ, with some admirals claiming bouts of immense heroism and bravery. Some, however, claim the Cybrex did not fire a shot, and allowed themselves to be destroyed. The truth of the matter is lost to history. It does seem, however, that all the Cybrex did not fall that day. It has been reported that during the Galactic Crisis, when the contingency played havoc with the galaxy's sentient machines, the Cybrex rose to defend the galaxy and help defeat the genocidal machines. It seems a non-genocidal sect survives, and may still be out there somewhere. And that finishes the Precursor timeline from the Zroni to the Cybrex. Let me know your favourite Precursor in the comments, and if you want to hear another video on Stellaris lore, please click the video on screen now.